BIG is a huge international firm. It works in different cultural worlds, in different frameworks. How can BIG work with these frameworks and still maintain some specificity of the project in different countries, in different cities?
Maybe you.
You know, it's that's a good question, and I think we see it differently because we see it very much as a thing that happens. Let's say between the project and design team and the specific assignment you're working with, that always becomes a very close relationship and collaboration. You visit the sites, you collaborate closely with the local consultants and clients, and in that work, in that daily work, projects tend to become very local and specific, and therefore like locally unique. So I think that our approach to architecture is less of sort of applying like a global style or a global sort of signature to a project, but it's much more about sort of diving into that local relationship and trying to figure out what the specific thing will result in creatively. So that's sort of our approach.
Yeah, I love it. No, it's absolutely true that it's more like trying to uncover the propensity, like what is the potential here and what can it become. And I think also if it was very much the list of ambitions from ESET, this idea of creating a neighborhood rather than a fortress, creating a campus, having something that is in the nature, but is also in the city, and I think that list of dreams and desires we try to sort of materialize in the design process.
Well, one thing is nature, of course. That's a huge inspiration. But what is this specific thing about Central Europe and Slovakia and Bratislava which you used in your design for the ESET campus?
Yeah, maybe just one thing. I mean, of course, it's very rooted in that specific context, and you are really at the base of the first hill rising and becoming part of the small Carpathians. And in that sense, we're creating a neighborhood that is really the last neighborhood before the hills, or it's the first hill that is still part of the city. So I think in that sense, it's maybe more specific to Patronka and to this part of Bratislava, a city that is surrounded by the hills and the forest, that we end up creating a campus and a neighborhood that is saturated with that quality.
Maybe also one thing that's special about this site is like just a thing like the local climate. Like we're sort of on a fairly southern latitude, so there's a good amount of solar energy on this site. But yet we have cold winters. We also have very hot summers that are needing a lot of cooling. So in this sense, the sustainability solution we are proposing in this building is actually a combination of a lot of harvesting of solar energy from the roof, with the use of thermal heat piles. Those heat piles are actually just the foundations of the buildings, but by running water into them, we can make sure that in the winter we can get a little warmer water up and reduce the amount of heating. In the summer we can get a little cooler water up and reduce the amount of cooling. So the heat piles combined with the solar roof is actually a quite sort of a special local sort of climate solution for this particular project.
Yes, actually, this design of the project was leaked already some time ago, and some people pointed out that it looks really like, for example, part of or office building in Tokyo, Toyota Woven City, in Japan or Terminus Group HQ in China. What are the key differences? Is it like just like your company language, or is it really like a product? Could we say that?
No, I think. I mean, of course, like architecture is also kind of a conversation. I think the project we're doing in with Toyota, the Woven City has these large, somewhat sort of Asian buildings with very large overhangs that I don't really think create the feeling of hills but of course there is curvature and there's solar energy, and I would say we're doing the headquarters for Google, where we are turning the entire roof into solar energy harvesting roof tiles. And similarly, we're building a very large project in Milano, where we're creating a big urban canopy that is harvesting roof. And I would say you're going to see a lot more solar roofs from Big, because that is one of the main sources of renewable energy. So of course, like, certain things are principles, just like any building on planet Earth has a roof because it has to stop the rain and the snow from entering your bedroom, right? So that's maybe one thing. And then I think, secondly, architecture is a discourse. It's a global conversation where you develop and evolve ideas. So in that sense, it would be naive to imagine that any building, and this is true for this campus, comes out of nowhere. It is deeply rooted, not just in the specifics of the site, but also in the specifics of the profession and the specifics of the technology. And so therefore it is influenced by our own body of work and by other projects in the architectural history, and it will probably influence itself other projects, maybe in Bratislava and maybe in the future architectural history. So in that sense, there is something like naive and maybe counterproductive about this idea that everything has to come out of nowhere, because nothing comes out of nowhere. It evolves gradually through architectural discourse.
So it will probably influence the architecture of Bratislava, or probably other developers will try to look like that. How else can architecture like this influence the city? Not only Bratislava, but city in general.
Maybe if I begin, like, I think one of the things where we set a pretty high bar for other companies to follow is actually in the way that this campus is really like a neighborhood and a village, that it is public and inviting and accessible in the most literal meaning of the word, that the kind of outer ring of smaller buildings actually have functions that will be open and available to the public, that the parking can be open and available to the public in weekends when they want to go to the small Carpathians. And even the solar energy can charge the vehicles and the bicycles for the people visiting. So I think that challenge of showing a private company how good citizens they can be in terms of making their city more generous and more public and more inviting is I believe a very hard bar that has been set.
Oh, for sure. And I mean, I think also when a project like this gets realized, the sustainability bar will have gone up drastically. Like, and you'll see that it becomes a thing that you talk about buildings that can supply their own energy, buildings that have minimal carbon footprint because of the use of timber. Those things hopefully will be a result of launching things like this into the world. So.
And what about image of the city? Do you think that this kind of architecture has the power to improve the image of the city, or is the star architecture or this something like Bilbao effect still actual?
Yeah, like in my mind, I think you're gonna start looking more at what buildings do to the environment around them and how they perform in the city than necessarily how they sort of look when you take a postcard picture of them. So I think hopefully what you call the Bilbao effect will be much more about how building works and what the result of their being in the city is, if they improve the environment, if they perform sustainably, if they generate life and safe and wonderful environments around them, more than about how they actually look on a sort of on the skyline or on a postcard.
Bratislava, as any city, struggles with measures against climate change. Of course, there are things like planting trees and adapting measures for rainwater to come into the ground and so on. But more serious measures, such as let's say ecological urbanism, are missing because many people fear that it will drastically change their lifestyle, and they're against this kind of lifestyle changes. And of course, politicians are hearing these people. What is some guidance for the city how to accept these more serious changes to make city more sustainable?
I mean, I think you can see that we had a great meeting with the mayor earlier today, and of course followed some of the initiatives that the city is looking into, and I think maybe on sustainable urbanism to make it like first of all to make choice possible, so that the more people that can actually live and work in the city, like basically the more you are in a sort of densely populated area, the lower the greenhouse gas emissions per household drops. So, and how can you make it choice? You can provide, of course, places where people can live, and maybe places where people can afford to live. You can provide the necessary amenities. You can make sure that you actually have a kind of campus like the one we're making for ESET be located within city limits, and you can provide for the possibility that for like this campus and everybody working there is going to be well connected with public transportation. You can also provide for the ease of use of bicycles and maybe even sort of carpooling and shared mobility. So I think there's a lot of systemic things that you can do that can make them the city sort of higher performing sustainably. And I think it's interesting because like Copenhagen has the goal to be carbon neutral by 2025, and I think the one place where they have a hard time reaching the goal, and they may not reach the goal, is on is the cars, the private car traffic, because they're converting the water buses to electric. They're converting the public buses, but still the private car use that is still not entirely electric or very far from is that one last hurdle. So anything you can do on a city level that makes it possible to make a different choice than driving in your own car is going to make a huge dent.
Yes, of course, and to your question, like I think one of the approaches is also that to give people the choice and to make it, of course, attractive to use public transport, but in this case also attractive to use if you use private transport, then to use electric transport. So, for example, we're working now to there will be car parking for possibly electric cars in the building, but it might even be that it becomes very attractive to use electric cars as opposed to a normal combustion engine car, because it will be so cheap to charge your car while you're at work because of the additional solar power that is at the peak hours in the middle of the day. So the minute that the bad thing about cars becomes a good thing, like it becomes a good thing to use electric cars, then you start accelerating that transformation to electric transport and start to come over the last hurdle in a fully carbon neutral society. So in that sense, for example, the cars which people require or wish to be a part of their lifestyle, they don't want to make that sacrifice. It could be that car ends up being a key element of the sustainable transition and not a problem for it. So it's...
When you mentioned Copenhagen, I watched Copenhagen development a little, and I see that new parts of the city are quite dense. They have like living ground floor and so on. When I compare to Slovakia, for example, and all of Eastern Europe, people are more going to the suburbs and they use private cars. That's also because of urban planning. What are the necessary changes in urban planning for the future? How to make urban planning actually sustainable, and what is maybe an inspiration for Bratislava how to change the urban planning?
I mean, again, these answers will be quite general because there's a limit to the intimacy of our knowledge of urban planning in Bratislava. We received a very large book that goes through the entire history of Bratislava. Yeah, like I think if you look at what created the kind of suburban paradigm that actually sort of spread all across Europe, but it seemed to be much more dogmatically implemented in the former Eastern Europe, was of course the fact that the dense historical city centers at the time were very unhealthy because they hadn't been renovated. You had like people living in. My dad grew up in central Copenhagen in the third building in the third backyard, so he had to go through one courtyard and then the next courtyard and then the next courtyard to get into their attic. Now that building has been condemned and the courtyard is now green with trees. So in that sense, I think a lot of the modernist paradigm that was so prevalent in a city like Bratislava, and you can still see like quite exotic remnants of it when you move around, seen from a Danish point of view, was that you were somehow choosing the opposite of the dense historical city. And I think what we see now, what is already going on, what we heard the mayor talking about, was to create a historical city that is more generous. We saw beautifully renovated squares. We saw streets where rows of cars had been taken out and trees had been planted instead. We saw the new bench that is going to be implemented. 1,000 benches are going to be put up in the next couple of months to make the city more accommodating, more enjoyable, more accessible, more inviting. And I think those very simple things that in a way make the inner city a more desirable lifestyle choice is what is required and what is happening and what is working. And I think a city like Copenhagen is a great example. When I was a teenager and it was time to move away from home, they had already started slowly renovating some of the parts of town, but it was still seen as the place where you had the drug dealers and prostitutes, and slowly but surely, the urban environment has been elevated to be a desirable place to live, and also a place where you can actually choose to stay when you get children. So in that sense, more than anything, it's really the way the dense city is going to win is by being a more desirable choice than the outskirts.
Yes, and
absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, but I think, like recently, I've a sort of a slightly new take on this because, and I think because I moved to London, and London is actually a city that works. It works differently from most cities, and because it has no massive infrastructure that makes it easy to go from one place to another. It has no massive road infrastructure, sort of cutting up the city in many small pieces. So most of life in London happens in small. It's a conglomerate of villages. So, and I would say if one thing is the recipe for a sustainable city, it's not to fight against the idea of suburban living or suburban density, because actually most people want to have a house with a garden. On the other hand, I think the challenge of sustainable urban development will be to make sure that you can have that suburban living close to where you work. That is the ideal scenario for most people. Imagine if you can live in a house with a garden, a row house with a garden maybe, but you can walk to work to your dense urban environment. That is somehow the ideal for probably everyone in the world. And in a strange way, London has managed to do this, possibly because there's no big roads that have been built through the city that makes it possible to live like really far away and commute by car all the time. So therefore, a lot of the life in London happens locally and within almost like a walkable radius. So I think we have to get away from this idea that all urban development has to be like dense only. On the other hand, it has to be in proximity, like it has to be within a walkable radius, but offer all the kinds of density within a radius. Like that's sort of.
Yeah, but it's also funny because like when you think about, I think London is a great example also. But when you think about the two largest cities in the world, let's say Tokyo and Mexico City. They actually also have this strangely polycentric and distributed density. They're the opposite of Manhattan. You might have a few eruptions where a few towers go up, but then right next to it you have more European density, and then maybe right next to that you have actually sort of townhouses and maybe even villas, and then so you end up having maybe again like if part of the city of the future and what we try to do with the woven city is this idea of a multimodal city where you can walk, you can drive, or you can bicycle through different kinds of streets that are almost, some of them are parks, some of them are streets, some of them are promenades, and maybe just like there's the multimodal city where you can move in different ways, there's maybe also the sort of multi-programmatic city where you can, within the same area, live in radically different ways at radically different densities.
We're slowly running.
It doesn't really become like this kind of one line.
No, I think it's like it's getting there.
What's the ecological city of the complicated question?
We're slowly running out of time, so last question. Some people believe that the way how to achieve this sustainability in cities is degrowth, or that cities or economies should stop growing and do not focus on like capitalistic values. Do you think that this concept actually can work, and can cities remain attractive if such concept prevails?
I don't know if, but I heard you said something about stopping growth, right? I mean, what is it? The only constant in the universe is change, or one of the characteristics of life is that it evolves, and another characteristic of life is that it grows, and another characteristic of life is that it spends energy that it harvests from the environment to sustain itself, to sustain the growth, and to evolve. So I think in that sense, these kind of fixed solutions that are based on abstract ideas about sort of a static situation are doomed to fail. And I think a healthy and successful city is also a city that is constantly evolving and constantly changing.
No, for sure.